Hello and welcome everyone to the Difference Maker Show. I am so glad you're here. Today's topic is the wonder of simply music, a revolutionary approach in playing piano. And we are going to meet the founder of Simply Music today, Neil Moore. Let me give you a little introduction. I'm Lynn Sanders, your host, and I'd like to ask you a question. What would it be like to be able to sit down and learn to play piano quickly and easily in all styles, as well as arrange, accompany, improvise, and compose? How would it feel to have music as your lifelong companion, where you can just sit down at the piano and play whatever comes into your heart? Today, you're going to find out more from the founder of Simply Music. You'll learn about his story, as well as find out tips and strategies that you can use to learn to play piano too. And here he is. Welcome, Neil Moore. How are you
Hey,
doing?
Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Thanks so much for the opportunity to chat today. I appreciate that.
It's so great to have you here.
Thank you.
I actually found out about Simply Music online, and I was really intrigued by your
Hmm.
story. Many
Yes.
people who know your story, but there are others who haven't. Could you share for us your background in becoming the world's leader in playing based program?
Sure. Well, look, this is a method of music learning, and so we present programs to students who want to learn how to play. We also present a program for teachers who'd like to be trained and licensed to teach the method, Simply Music. The method itself is the codification of the way that music occurred for me as a very young child. From about the age of 3 or 4, I would hear music and I could picture it in terms of shapes and patterns. I could see as the melody would move from one note to the next, it would draw a picture in my mind, a little bit like if you look up at the night sky and you see a sky full of stars, but somebody says, hey, if you join these stars together, it creates a constellation. So now you have this imaginary picture. For me, it's like that. When music is playing from one note to the next, I see it in terms of shapes and patterns. I never really thought anything of it as a young child. That was just the way that it organically occurred for me. But when I began studying piano at the age of 7, my teacher would play the songs that I was to be learning. And as could see his hands across the instrument, I could also see these same shapes and patterns that I'd been visualizing in my mind's eye. And so even though I had lessons right throughout childhood and well into my teen years with this same teacher who taught traditionally, I really developed my entire musicianship on this natural, organic approach for me, which was seeing music in terms of shapes and patterns. I actually had a lot of shame about that too, because I always thought that, my teacher would be expecting me to learn how to read music, just like my older brothers were, in them having lessons as well. But
Right.
that page made absolutely no sense for me. I didn't need it in any way or shape or form. I could hear music, I could see it in terms of shapes and patterns and just construct my musicianship using that approach. But every time I would have a lesson, I always thought, wow, is this the week where I'm going to be found out that I'm really faking it and I wasn't, reading at all. And what
Right.
I didn't know is that he'd already when this was first happening, he would go out to my mother and say, Neil's not reading, he's just pretending to read. And fortunately, my mother said, yeah, but, he's playing really well, just to let him do his own thing. I didn't know they'd made that agreement, so I always had this fear that I was going to be found out as being sort of fraudulent for not, learning how to read music. And in fact, I didn't learn how to read music until I was well into my 30s.
Wow.
When I returned to some formalized music studies, I wanted to immerse my life more in musicianship, making music. And I then learned how to read, and I also learned a method of teaching traditionally and became a trainer of other teachers in that system. And I earned a reputation as being a successful teacher and a successful teacher trainer. And I got a phone call one day from a government agency, and they asked if I would teach this young 8-year-old boy how to play music. This boy was blind, and they were working on some procedure to see if they could restore his sight. And he was in hospital regularly having these procedures. And at the time, they just said to me, we'd love him to have some activity that could be sort of a break from a lot of the complexity that he was struggling with as a result of all these procedures. I jumped at the opportunity to teach him, and it wasn't really until after I'd agreed to do that that it suddenly occurred to me, heck, what am I going to do? The only thing I knew how to teach was a reading-based approach, a more traditional approach, and here's this boy without sight. What the heck am I going to do? And it really wasn't until then that it occurred for me consciously, for the first time, hang on a moment, I never learned how to read. What was I actually doing as a child? And that was really the first time that I sat down and started to consciously look at what I was doing, bring language to what I was doing, create and articulate distinctions around what I was doing. And at that time, I thought, I think I can show him how to feel these shapes on the instrument. And that's how I approached it with him. And he was doing incredibly well. He'd had several months of lessons. He was already playing a repertoire of music, which was wonderful. I thought he was doing so great because being without sight, I thought he had must have a very developed ear. But I said to his father one day, hey, are you happy with Wade's progress? His name was Wade. And his dad said something that I will never forget this moment. His father said, not only are we happy with it, but he's teaching his 4-year-old sister how to play this way, and she's blind too. Wow. And that was like a crucible moment. It was a life-changing moment for me. I didn't even really realize what I had. I just knew something very important had happened. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if I showed. I mean, if I've got an 8-year-old boy who's without sight and he can teach a 4-year-old girl how to play and she's without sight, what would happen if I showed all my beginning students? At that time, I was just thinking this might be like music preschool before students migrated over to real music, which was still, in my mind, in those days, learning how to read music as a means of learning how to play. So I started to show my other students this approach, and I was shocked by the results that I saw. I thought at that time, I'm getting these results because this way of looking at music is so organic and natural to me. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if I showed other teachers. I was already training teachers. I wondered what would happen if I showed them, if they were able to replicate these results. And when they came back saying, wow, we haven't seen anything like these results, how quickly people are learning and how easy it is in comparison to the more traditional approach. You know, the quality of music the students were able to play so quickly. And the quantity of music that they were able to learn was unlike anything we'd saw. And it was really at that time, still not realizing what I had in my hands, but I thought, okay, this warrants me exploring this. And so over a very long period of time, I developed it firstly into a methodology of learning, and then subsequently into a methodology of training teachers how to teach. And we've gone from that to now. We have a community of educators, about 700 educators across 12 countries, and then we also have a self-study platform where we present this method directly to students, and we have a student community across 125
It's so amazing. You know, Neil,
countries. So it's been an incredible journey, absolutely humbling and remarkable.
I mean, so really, in a sense, just as I was just thinking about this, just as your method is a breakthrough, you yourself had a breakthrough in recognizing that you had a gift all along. And it was probably a meant-to-be situation that you were introduced to Wade, who couldn't see, so that you could then realize your gift and share it with the world. I'd like to have you take a moment to explain what is meant by a playing-based method. How do people get their hands around the idea that they could suddenly start playing music right away from the very beginning? Can you give us a little more?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, really good question. Well, I think the first thing to do to help clarify that would be to spend a moment talking about what is the typical, what's the normal way that people learn music. And so in any country, well, firstly, if we look on a global basis, music's taught very differently in many different cultures. But if we look at more developed nations where music is taught formally, there's one predominant approach, and I call that a reading-based approach. It's pretty simple to understand. You start with a teacher from the very beginning, and they start to teach you all the symbols that are used to represent the notes that are played. And I'll talk about it from the perspective of piano because that's our primary instrument. So you are working from the beginning by learning how to read symbols, decode symbols. And music is very different than our spoken language. So if you and I are reading our native tongue, we're reading one language that's made up of one alphabet.
Right.
In music, you're dealing with symbols that represent which notes to play, symbols that represent the different rhythmic elements. There are symbols to indicate which fingers to use, symbols to indicate when the feet are being used on the pedals. There are symbols to represent, well, the lyrics, if there's lyrics. There is completely different language for expression and dynamics. And just to make it even more complicated, they'll often use Italian language to be able to indicate that. And then there's other symbols that tell you start here and go down to here and play there. It's really complicated. I don't think it should be called reading music. It should be called multiple simultaneous language translation.
Oh my God. Deciphering
Because
music.
that's what's happening. You're having to really learn, about 7 or 8 different codified systems in order to be able to decode the page and then translate it to the instrument. And this is why music has such a high failure rate. This is why so many students have struggled for so long. And it's also given birth to these cultural myths that, oh, some people have musical ability and some people don't, which is just nonsense. Every single human being, without exception, is profoundly musical. In fact, I know there are different belief systems around this. For some people, there's the belief that we're spiritual beings. Okay.
Mhm.
I think then the very next layer is that we are musical beings, because it underscores all gesture and even right down to the cycle of breath and the cycle of a heartbeat. And if we start even getting into a subatomic level, we see that it's all vibration and there are constant rhythmic patterns underscoring it all. I believe we are a profoundly musical species, and it's very, very natural for us to be connected to our musicality. And I think what disrupts that is when we start to teach music formally, and we access our musicality through symbols and through the math and the theoretical aspects and the technical aspects. Now the whole learning is occurring in a different hemisphere of the brain, and a far more analytical domain of the brain. It's not entirely left brain, because we know now that nothing really is, but certainly biased towards a more left brain experience, and I feel that it really disconnects us. Now,
Right. I agree.
neurologically, if we go to the deepest level and start to look at the design of the brain at its fundamental level is a pattern-seeking device. If you're able to interact with the brain at the level of patterns, that's its playground. That's its necessary nutrition. The brain loves recognizing and is designed. It's geared up and wired, naturally biased towards looking at things in terms of shapes and patterns, recognizing shapes and patterns, remembering shapes and patterns, interacting with shapes and patterns. So if we are able to actually present music in terms of shapes and patterns, we're now actually staying very, very connected to something that's organic and natural to us. And so, whilst Simply Music was never designed with that, with the intention of being so organically aligned with the neurology, this is something that I've discovered over time when I've asked the question, wow, why is it that this program is so effective? How is it that it's so effective? And I've come to educate myself after the fact that, oh, I see. It's because everything that we do is in terms of shapes and patterns. And because of that, there's no barrier to entry. And so we can immediately connect to that natural musicianship, which really warrants discussion as a separate issue in and of itself. But that's the reason why, whether you're a child or a teenager or an adult or an elder, it doesn't really matter. You can start with this program this week. If you start this week, you're playing next week. And I don't mean, nursery rhymes poking out one note at a time.
Right.
In our world, from the very beginning, you're playing contemporary style music and classical music and blues and ballads and arrangements and getting into accompaniment and composing and improvising, at an entry level, which is perfect and appropriate and wonderful. But the truth of the matter is that you're experiencing natural musicianship, and you get to hear and play music that sounds like it's real music, and it's deeply satisfying, and of course has a profound impact on the brain. All
Yeah.
sorts of things
You know,
about the
you know,
brain.
I think is so interesting is that some people don't think they're musical because someone told them somewhere and it's stuck in their brain. And what your method does is say, we're all musical because even as I listen to you speak, you're speaking in a pattern. And so
That's
I'm speaking in a pattern. We all brush our teeth in a pattern, as you've said. We walk in
yes.
a pattern. So
Yes.
let's say, I think you're in your studio right now. Is the piano behind you?
Yes, that's um,
I wondered if we could just, if for fun, just try so people who are wondering, well, what is the pattern? How are they going to, if they've never experienced simply music, they just know about music with reading notes. Can you give us a little mini demonstration for just a minute of how we would learn something in a pattern without music?
yeah. Well, and ordinarily, if I do that, I'd be set up with the camera so you could see what was
That's
happening. So,
okay.
but probably the simplest way to do that would be to firstly just show you something in my hands, and I can just sort of lean over and
Sure, that would be
represent that.
fine.
And so, whenever we're presenting content, I try to do that in simple terms that we can ordinarily relate to, that are just a part of our everyday life, right? So, if, for example, if I were to look at three words: bottom, middle, and top. We are familiar with those words. The bottom's at the bottom of something, the middle's in the middle, and the top's at the top of something. Really
Right.
straightforward. If I were to represent that in terms of my hand, for example, and looking at my five fingers, I could say, well, let's call this one the bottom. And that would make sense then that this is the top.
Hmm.
And that would make sense then that this one here would be the middle. So we'd have the bottom and the middle and the top. Okay, three really simple concepts. So now let's see if we can create what I'll call a sentence. And if you just think in terms of language, what happens in language is you organize words together to create a spoken sentence. Same thing with music. You play notes one after the other to create a musical sentence.
Right.
So if I were to create a musical sentence using my three concepts of the bottom and the middle and the top, one sentence might be where I just went from the middle and I worked my way up to the top. So it would just be middle to top. That would be one sentence.
Middle to top.
I could actually take now the top and just work my way to the bottom. We could have a sentence going top to bottom.
Top to bottom.
And then we could take another sentence and go bottom to middle and just
Bottom
working
to
our way
top.
up. So we had middle to top, top to bottom, and bottom to middle. Really simple concept. And anyone that has an instrument could sit down and do this themselves. Middle to top, top to bottom, bottom to middle. So if I went over to the keyboard and I just played this here now,
Here.
I'm just going to put my fingers over five notes. If I could show you, I'm going to put them in a particular position. But if I just played that first sentence, middle to top, if I played the next sentence, top to bottom, and if I played the third sentence, bottom to middle. Okay, so just those three sentences, middle to top, top to bottom, bottom to middle. Now, without even realizing it, we've learned the main theme of Beethoven's Ode to Joy.
I
So
love
that
that.
song that many, many, many of us are very familiar with.
Right.
It goes. Really, what we're dealing with is middle to top, top to bottom, bottom to middle. So really, what happens is that we can take complex, known, lovely pieces of music and see that when I distill this down, there's actually just a simple series of sentences or shapes or patterns that we're working with. And I know that I'm rushing through this, but just in a minute or two, it's like, wow, we can start getting right into playing a classical melody. And we've been able to achieve that in, a minute or two. Imagine what could happen if you were with a teacher or you were learning with the self-study program and you had 30 or 40 minutes to look at something and see,
Right.
wow, I've got a pattern here that's simple, a few sentences. I've got some simple things that I can do on my left hand. We have ways of being able to also bring, both hands together. Also, that's using particular the representation of things in shapes and patterns. So here's this really simple approach, and the thing that's most wonderful about it is that the more complicated the music gets, the easier it is to start to see these shapes and patterns. So
That's so fantastic. Thank
that
you for
was really
doing that.
rushing through it, but
No, no, that was great because I was thinking that people might not understand how they could figure out shapes and patterns without looking at music. And you create actual diagrams, I know, on the page so that people can get an idea of the shapes. Now, some people may say, well, do people ever get to learn to read the music? How do you
right.
answer them?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a great thing to be able to read music. Look, how to think of this program is to just keep bringing it back to our relationship with language.
Right.
So you and I had the opportunity to speak for years before we learned how to read and spell. In fact, it was our ability to be able to speak fluently that enabled us to make sense of the symbols when we were introduced to music reading. Oh, I see. These symbols make up this word that I can already say. It's the same with our approach. We want to delay the theory of music. We want to delay the math. We want to delay the attention on the page, get it away from that left brain, more theoretical, analytical thing. We want to present it in terms of shapes and patterns because that's organic to the brain. And we want to use that to develop an entire foundation. So our typical beginner, regardless of their age, after their first 12, 18 months of lessons, you could expect to have a repertoire of 30, 40, 50 complete pieces covering contemporary, classical, gospel, blues, jazz, ballads, arrangements, accompaniments, compositions, improvisations. I mean, it's a whole different world. But with that broad experience of playing and that natural connection to your musicianship expressed in this beautiful repertoire of playing, now we're going to introduce these symbols and start to get a theoretical understanding of what it is that we already have the ability to do. So even though we're going to introduce music after the fact, the other thing is the way in which we introduce music is also very different. It's still based on these same principles. Simply Music really is about learning a way of learning. It's sort of like a lens. And once you have that lens, you could apply it to, well, any topic. I mean, we've had lots and lots of teachers say that the things that they've learned from looking at things this way has impacted other subjects that they teach. And that's
so
a really common thing
impressive.
for people to
You know,
say.
you call it a revolutionary breakthrough approach, and I know you've done studies scientifically to show that students have a geometric increase in their learning through Simply Music. Geometric results.
Yeah, well, they do. And I mean, I like to just keep it at its most practical level. And so from that point of view, if we were to look at the underlying tenets of traditional music education, the intent really, as I see it, is let's equip students with a mastery, with the ability to develop a mastery over the distinctions that are needed to help them elevate to adult concert level performance. Well, I mean, maybe that's appropriate for someone who wants to elevate to adult concert level performance. Most people don't. The vast majority don't. People really just want to be able to play. And unfortunately, they think it's something, many people think it's something that's unattainable because they don't have talent. And largely they've been told that by the music education fraternity. It's staggering to this very day when I'm online in different piano teacher forums to watch the dialogue and how often and how freely music educators talk about some students having musical talent and others not. I find that just mind-boggling.
What goes in their brain, that's what they think for their whole life.
Well, and and I understand how that emerges because we've been taught. If you can imagine, we had music. Originally we had more of a folk relationship with it. Music was woven throughout the culture and throughout the community. And really that's what gave birth to our extraordinary composers when we go back centuries ago. And in those days, we had no other means of being able to capture that music and to replicate that music other than to write it down. And of course, then we needed to train people in how to be able to translate all of that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to preserve it for posterity. And so we had to teach people how to understand this as a means of being able to retain the great works of the great masters. I can understand that. And thankfully that it has been the case. And so no doubt that our traditional approach has served us well in traditional times. But we are way from traditional times. We're not in that world anymore. And really, this is a very unique time in human history. We are all witnessing the arrival of a technological tsunami that is revolutionizing the experience of what it means to be a human being. And the rate and the depth and the speed of change that's occurring now is only a fraction of what's to come in just a handful of years. What we're going to be seeing over the next 5, 10 years will fundamentally alter to the core our experience of what it means to be human. Now we are normalizing the discussion about human beings becoming a multiplanetary species. Incredible. We're now talking and normalizing the conversation that human beings will become a hybrid biological, non-biological species. That's incredible. We're now talking about us having to develop a capability for us to integrate artificial intelligence into our own organic intelligence. And we don't need to get into, is that right, is it wrong, is it good, is it bad, do I agree or disagree? We don't need to get into any of that. But the technological train has left the station, and it is coming, whether you like it or not. I'm of the view that the critical currency of the future will be creativity.
Mm.
And more so than ever before, we need to develop, impact, expand people's creative capability, because everything comes from our creative capability. And so creative musicianship has an impact on the brain. The ability to be able to play music, we know now from studies that playing music actually thickens the prefrontal cortex. It actually expands the connectivity, the number of connections that the brain makes.
Wow.
And that's really the basis of creativity. You can imagine if we had a city and we only had one road, you'd only have one choice. But if you created another alternative road, now you've got a couple of choices, and you may even be able to go back and forth between both. Well, what about if we created a whole network of roadways and streets and alleyways and freeways and lanes? Now you'd have thousands or an infinite number of ways of getting from one destination to the next. And that's really how the brain works. Our ability to be able to function and think creatively comes out of the amount of connectivity that we have. And what we now know about musicianship, not just listening to music, but specifically learning how to play music, impacts the brain more than twice as much as any other form of art or sport. That's incredible.
Wow.
It's essential for us now in order to really nurture the opportunity for our children not just to function in this new future, but to flourish in this new future. We need to develop and expand their creative capability. And also for those of us that are aging, we're dealing with a significantly larger portion of the population. They're heading towards later years. We used to think that the brain couldn't learn and didn't create new brain cells. What we now know is that that's not true. We are creating new brain cells, and they can be developed, and we can expand our creative capability, and it can play a very significant role in helping to protect us from some of the issues that we're seeing with regard to the brain degradation. Alzheimer's and
Wow.
Parkinson's and
It's
all of
so
those things. So
exciting.
it's absolutely critical. I think of learning music now, apart from the entertainment aspects and the emotional and the psychological benefits and the spiritual benefits and the communal benefits, being able to share music and the healing and the nurturing and the comfort that it provides, etc., all wonderful. But as importantly, if not more importantly, having musicianship at the level of the brain, it provides critical neurological nutrition. Absolutely critical. So just as water is essential and just as air is essential, I'm of the view that providing the brain with the critical creative nutrition that it needs is going to be essential for every human being across any stage or any age group.
Wow, that's so impressive what you just said. This is really what you're saying is this is brain food, learning to be able to play music quickly and easily so you don't get discouraged and you can express yourself,
Exactly that.
both healing, and it's building our brain power, so people can have better memory and better, just thinking skills. I love the analogy of the highway too, because people don't really think about their brain cells growing. But what you're saying is they're growing all the time. And this
Yeah,
is,
it's an interesting thing. Yeah, we've started to understand it more in certain areas. Like we know that we eat food, and we know generally that it's important to eat quality food, but we also understand that it's important to have supplements. So, for example, taking supplements has now become something that's been normalized, and we really appreciate that. We can have active lives, but we also know it's important for us to work out and stretch, and we see that people are exercising more than ever before. We know that rest is important, but now more than ever before, we're seeing people understand that we need different types of rest, that, the types of calm that come from yoga and meditation, and that's becoming more normalized for people. I'm very much of the perspective that more so than ever before, we need to see that music, creative musicianship, not learning it as a math, but learning it where it connects with our natural musicality, has the ability to play a more essential role than ever before in human history.
wow, well, that leads me to a question. I'd like you to first just say, how long has Simply Music been around? And I know this is a worldwide practice. Can you share a few of the success stories from different populations, as well as the ones that you have been finding for people with special needs?
Yeah. Well, the answer to the first question, how long has it been around? There are actually two answers to that. So uh, clearly, I said in the beginning that this method is the codification of the way that music occurred for me as a child. So from that perspective, and I mean that literally, that the fundamental, the core principles, the core tenets of this program are precisely the materializing the way that music occurred for me as a child. So, I'm 64 years of age. So, its principles have been in place for at least 62 or 61 of those years, right?
Right.
But the actual codification of the program and its availability to the public as a methodology, we're coming up to 25 years. Yeah.
So
And
when it
so,
comes to the success
look,
stories,
people say, well, what great musicians have you produced? And it's like, I don't think that's not the question that we need to ask anymore.
right?
The question to me is, if I took on 100 students, how many of them will learn how to play? And I'll say 100.
That's the real question.
That's the thing. It's like, okay, have you taken on students who believe they're completely not musical? Oh, thousands, more than I could possibly count. And how many have learned how to play? All of them. We have this belief that you've got to start when you're young. Well, that might be true in a traditional world. In fact, in a traditional world, about 95% of students are between the ages of 5 and 12. In our world, half of our students are the age 35 to 100 plus, so centenarians are total beginners and are learning how to play. So to me, this is really what we need. We need music for the masses. We need a program that's designed to connect everybody immediately to their natural musicianship. So that's what I hold out as our greatest accomplishments. Now, there are things where we've had that opportunity without even making any change to the curriculum, maybe altering how the size of the dosage that we might deliver to students depending on the circumstances. But one of the things that we've discovered about this program is because it accesses the brain differently, we are able to make inroads into situations where traditional methods may not have succeeded. And so we have a history now of being able to have wonderful success with students, with ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, on the autism spectrum, people that have had brain trauma, fetal alcohol syndrome. I'm reminded of some of the students where I had an opportunity to meet families who had children that were struggling with the extraordinary complexity of Tourette's syndrome. And I remember speaking to one young girl, and she just talked to me about what it was like being, I think she was 9 or 10 at the time, and what it was like having Tourette's for her, just in the interaction with her friends. She would say, we would go to a movie, and with Tourette's syndrome, it manifests and expresses itself in what's referred to as a tic, some sort of it could be a physical gesture, or it could be a spoken word the insistence on that expressing itself overrides one's ability to resist that. And so for her, she said, I would go to a movie with my friends, and I would sit there gripping the seat and clenching my teeth just to force herself to not tick and embarrass herself and her friends in the movie. And she said, and I'd come out of the movie and I'd be aching and I'd have to go home to just rest. I mean,
Wow.
it's like I had no idea that type of experience was her world that she lived with every day. And yet, in being able to immediately acquire musicianship, she said, I can sit at the piano for hours and have no ticking.
Wow.
It's just like it doesn't, I don't have it.
It makes
Like,
such a difference.
this is remarkable. I mean,
So that's
yeah.
very amazing that the music actually touched a part of her where she didn't have to have any kind of outward sign of Tourette. What is your vision or your goals? Because we're dealing with a different world, as you said earlier. Now everything being digital. What is your vision for Simply Music as we move forward into the future?
Well, actually, Lynn, for the most part, it hasn't really changed. If I were to look back at what was the bottom line, what was I really intending to do? And I didn't want to articulate a vision in some ethereal language. It's like, really, what this is about is a world where everyone plays. Now, what does that mean, a world where everyone plays? Well, there's different ways of being able to express that, and it means all of that. But, for me, what I see, if I were to begin to quantify it, I think we have the opportunity to bring creative musicianship to the population at large, that it's a multicultural opportunity. And I do believe that what is being asked of humanity, human being 2.0,
Hmm.
needs to be a more profoundly creative species than ever before seen. And so, in order for us to become a creative species, we need to engage in those activities that directly, fundamentally impact our creative capability. And so, I don't know exactly what role we have to play in that, but I certainly do know we play a role. And I believe we can play a significant, if not a dramatic role, in contributing to a breakthrough in creativity for humanity.
That's beautiful. Years ago, I was a camper at Interlochen Music Camp,
Yeah.
and I remember the words over Kresge Auditorium. Music is the universal language, which many of us know. So you have a gift today that's going to really, I think, touch people's lives all over the world. And I want to have you share it. I'm going to put it on the screen here. Give me just a moment. I have to go to another screen. Oh, here it is. So could you explain what this gift is and how people could take advantage of it?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Well, one of the things that has become very important to me over the duration of Simply Music's history is to make this program available to individuals and communities and cultures who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford world-class creative musicianship education. And so I have developed a self-study program. The principle of activity of Simply Music over the last 25 years has been training educators around the world who want to be licensed to teach my system of education. And so if you wanted to get access to Simply Music, you needed to learn with a teacher. What our self-study platform does is it gives people the opportunity to be able to take advantage of technology, learn any time of the day. As long as you can get access to the internet, you can have access to online learning. And so I've taken the essence of the Simply Music curriculum, I've developed it into a foundation course, and that's a beautiful course, and it's a fantastic start. And I'm making that program available at absolutely no cost. It's not a marketing upsell idea or anything like that. There's no credit card or anything like that. It's a genuine commitment to make world-class, free education available where people can connect to their natural musicianship and start and immediately be able to play great sounding music. So it's easy to get to that program if you just go to simplymusic.com. That takes you to our main landing page, and there are different sections. You'll see those sections about learning or becoming a teacher or learning with a teacher, but you'll also see this big section on that page about our free online self-study program. And so you just need to click on that and just put in your name and an email address, and which we actually just do to communicate and support you through the learning. You're not only learning these pieces, but we provide it's filmed beautifully and edited beautifully. It's a world-class program. We provide these beautiful soundtracks so that not only do you learn a piece of music, like before I played a little example of Ode to Joy, not only will you learn that, but you have the opportunity then to play along with beautifully produced soundtracks where you get to experience playing and being a member of the band or the ensemble or the orchestra. So it really gives a completeness and a comprehensive experience of one's natural musicianship. And so, yeah, that's available at no cost, and I love that we're making that available. And I'm particularly interested in how I make this available to drug and alcohol and rehabilitation clinics, youth at risk, penal institutions, as well as opportunities to be able to bring this into third world and developing nations, at no cost, free education.
That's amazing. That's so exciting. So you just go to simplymusic.com and click on the free self-study course. So,
Yeah.
So we are out of time, except I want to leave everyone with a message. What would you like to say as a closing message to everyone listening? What's an important thing for people to remember, Neil?
Well, if there's one thing that I could say, if we were able to disseminate that across the
Mhm.
planet, it would change the world. Is that every single human being, without exception, is deeply, naturally, profoundly musical. The second part is that there is a way and a means now of you being able to immediately and naturally connect with your musicianship and be able to develop an entirely new means of self-expression that will have a profound impact not only on your self-expression but also on providing that neurological foundation that will serve you well for the rest of your life.
I love it. So remember, Simply Music, the breakthrough approach that can give music to you simply, easily, naturally. And I recommend everyone to check it out. It's an amazing experience. Thank you so much, Neil, for your
Oh, thanks,
time.
Lynn. Great to see you today. Thanks very
And
much
it
for
was
having me
wonderful
as a
having
guest.
you here.
My pleasure.
And thank you. And all of you, take music with you to your heart. It's part of you naturally. So listen to Neil and you'll be glad you did. Thank you again. Bye-bye.